Dream 1. God and His Angels. I taught myself how to lucid dream so that I could fly. I had gotten pretty good at it after 2 years, and there was a spot that I liked to go to in my mind. It was a series of tropical islands, 2 that were narrowly connected like the shape of an 8, and then a 3rd island off a ways. In my dreams I liked to fly high over them, just to where the clouds began. From the sky I would identify paths between the trees, under the waterfalls, lock them in, and then swoop down, dashing quickly between them, sometimes allowing the leaves to brush against my face. But a few days ago, something alarming happened. While dreaming, I was up high, planning out my next route to swoop, when suddenly the sky above me and among me went dark. Clouds gathered, lightning and heavy rain broke out. At first it made me feel alive, and I mistakenly thought that I had manifested this weather. I began my nosedive as lightning struck inches in front of my face. I brought myself to a halt, and a voice spoke to me from the clouds.
Who do you think you are? Do you feel powerful in here? Flying around like you think you are a god? My angels, put this man down.
In my dream, I was beginning to feel fear. I wanted to get above the clouds, and I flew quickly upwards. But the storm didn't seem to end. There were merely kaleidoscopic layers of cloud stacked on top of each other to infinity. I knew from previous experiences I should have been in space by now. I stopped in the air to consider my next course of action. A heavy object whizzed by my ear. It looked like a spear made out of a gnarled tree branch. I turned to see these 2 deformed creatures, with monstrous 10-foot wingspans and about 10 feet in length including their tails. I had never had any insects or animals on these islands previously. The bodies of these creatures looked human, although they looked like corpses that had been burned alive. Their faces were contorted in a way that suggested they died screaming in anguish. One of them still held a gnarled spear in his arms. The other, unarmed, quickly grew a second spear out of his hand. I turned and flew as fast as I could away. The pursuit began. They were screeching at me. Eventually, my luck ran out when a spear hit me in the back of the shoulder. I could feel almost some sort of cool poison spreading down my arm and up my neck. I looked at it to see some sort of pitch-black fungus spreading. I turned on the angels and began shooting fire out of my hands, realizing the desperate state I was in. But they were extremely agile and avoided my fire easily. They swooped in and held me still as I felt the fungus take over my face. That was the moment at which I woke up. In hindsight, it did seem as though I was being made into one of them. I don't know if I'll ever attempt to lucid dream again, but it's only been a few days. Maybe a bit of time off will set me straight. Dream 2. Ritual Intruder. My first time lucid dreaming, I spawned into the dream in the front yard of my childhood home. It was night, and the sky was purple. I knew it was a dream. I heard a chanting coming from within my house, and I walked up to the window and looked through. Every light in the house was off. Knowing it was a dream, I decided to attempt to phase through the wall. I was successful, but the interior of the wall was disturbing, filled with cobwebs and mouse droppings. Despite its irking me, I pushed my head through to the other side, the inside of my house. It was dead silent. I started to freak out, realizing I had made myself somewhat vulnerable, head within the stillness of the house and body left outside. I pulled my head back out, and again heard the chanting. I walked back out to the yard and looked up the street one way, then the other. not seeing any signs of life. I realized then that the chanting must have been coming from the backyard. The house I grew up in had a long fence gate that could swing open wide enough to allow a car to pass through. I walked around to that side of the house and phased through the gate to peer into my own backyard. I was being as quiet as I could, and as I gazed into my yard, I saw a large purple bonfire and a gathering around it. The people in the gathering seemed to be mainly male. They were wearing large straw hats, although it was difficult to see in the dark. And for some reason I had this notion in my mind that they were villagers of some sort. Of what village, I did not know. I stared deeper into the purple flames as they continued to chant, and I began to see something arise from the ashes at the bottom of the pit. As it slowly took form, it appeared to be a giant, portly and about 20 feet tall, wearing black robes and a witch's hat. I gasped in awe, and at that moment I heard dogs start to growl and bark. They must have heard my gasp or smelled me. I began walking briskly so as not to make the noise of running, back through the gate and phased through. When I had reached the center of my yard, I realized the dogs were coming towards me as their barks grew louder. I heard the clinking of their collars as well. I knew walking wasn't going to cut it. The dogs could smell me at this point. I knew I needed to fly, and for some reason, it didn't occur to me to just bodily ascend. Instead, I began flapping my arms the way a bird would. With each downstroke, I ascended a few inches and was suspended in the air until the next downstroke propelled me further. The dogs had hopped the gate at this point and were charging towards me. One jumped into the air and bit onto my pant leg. Luckily, as I had made myself phase, he could not puncture my skin. The dog was persistent and kept a hold of me until I'd made it about 2 meters off the ground. I could feel the earth shaking. That giant monstrosity was coming. I saw the pointy tip of its witch hat coming over the roof of my house. The dogs now hovered around near where my feet had been and stared up at me. The giant was now coming around into the front yard. I knew that at the height I was currently at, it would be able to reach me, and I pumped my arms as hard as I could. Just as it arrived where I had formerly stood, I felt comfortably out of range. The creature stared up at me, revealing eyes that looked like purple flames. It lifted its hand to me, and in the palm, a purple flame began. It whirled itself into a small orb that then delicately floated towards me. It made contact with my pant leg where the dog had bit me, and at that moment, I lost my power in the dream. I started to fall, but woke up just before I hit the ground. Before I started doing this, I would never have imagined a creature in a dream powerful enough to take me out of it. Dream 3. Fetch in the classroom. I thought it might be fun to use lucid dreaming to try to relive some of my high school days. In grade 11, I had a chemistry class and teacher that I really liked. The teacher was really passionate about the subject, and I really enjoyed his style of humor. One night, once I realized I was in dream, I brought myself into my old high school. I spawned in front of my grade 11 locker. Around the corner was the door to the chemistry class. I walked right in, without anyone paying me mind. It was just as I remembered it. In fact, I did think I was walking into a memory. I saw my old 16-year-old self at the front of the room, loving every minute of the class. I smiled and walked to the back to watch the lesson unfold. "Why are acids sold at such a high concentration?" the teacher asked. I watched my young hand raise at the front of the room. "So you get more bang for your buck," I said. "Correct!" he shouted. I had remembered that moment fondly, and I couldn't help but smile to see it play out again. There was a strange air in the room after that point, though, and I felt a prickling on the back of my neck. My young self turned to stare at me from the front of the room. the first notice anyone had given to my being there. He had almost an unnatural scowl on his face. In the dream, I didn't at first find this quite as alarming as perhaps I should have. None of the other students or even the teacher seemed to notice that my young self was having this episode, even though he was staring right past the people behind him. Suddenly, the sound stopped. I couldn't hear a thing, and my young self said, "You don't belong here." There was a period of silence where I realized that he was addressing me in the dream, and I began to feel fear. "You should leave," he told me, more sternly this time, and standing up. I just stood there, not sure of what to do. He was between myself and the door, and I certainly in that moment wanted to leave, but I was afraid to walk past him. Rather abruptly, he rose into the air and began floating towards me, screaming in my face, his face contorting. At that moment, I woke up. I always feel wary now when seeing myself in the third person in a memory. Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another video, and tune in on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a brand new live episode of Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. Until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.